Actually, Todd and I were at the school at the same time. I think he was a couple years behind me, but just like you guys, you only hang around with your year. You would not talk to somebody in a lesser year. But I do remember his graduating collection. It was called Red Like a Butcher Shop. It was one of the most memorable collections I ever walked the Ryerson Runway. And he had done these leather molded corsets, and they were dripping with blood. It was really, really phenomenal. So a lot of this work that you're seeing on the rock stars is really influenced by what he did at that time. Shifting into my topic, first of all, I have never seen myself this big in print before, so my kids will be very impressed. And then I'm reading the abstract, and I hope you're not being turned off by the abstract and the obvious academic nature of this text. But this is how this whole thing came about. I submitted this talk to another conference last year. And the audience were actually industry people. And my submission was rejected. I wonder why. Because I was going to talk about practices that were probably not easy to listen to. And I thought when Jane invited me to talk about anything I wanted to talk about, I thought, I'm going to try this again. All right? Now, since then, though, I've taken a different approach on this subject about internship, and specifically unpaid internship in fashion in specific. And that is what I thought originally was going to be a research paper. It's actually now more of a dialogue, more of an idea. And the way we're going to work through today's session is I'll give you some background, a little bit of grounding, but it will also be interactive. All right? So it's not necessarily a test, but I do want some of your feedback in helping me shape some of these ideas. Now, incidentally, what better place to do this than in Manchester? Cottonopolis. This is where Engels and Marx met. This is where socialism papers were created. This is where the labor movement started, the suffragettes movement, the Trades Union Congress, and even have a People's History Museum here that talks about the struggles of labor history over time. I'm also a student of critical management studies. I'm doing my PhD at the University of Leicester, so forgive me if I bring in ideas of Marxism, socialism, postmodernism, and isms as you go on, all right? But I think we have to think about these issues critically, and I indulge you to kind of follow me through that. But I also have to set the context in terms of kind of where I'm coming from. And to help you along, I'm kind of giving you sort of the headings that I'm going to be talking about: context, underbelly, angle, internship, research, ethics, resources, issues, strategies, and questions. You're going to be participating here. I find it kind of useful, that way you know how much longer he's going to ramble on before he's finished. But it also helps provide a narrative. Right? Now, I work at Ryerson University. I really define my role more as Chief Cheerleading Officer. And as Tom had said earlier about humility in the business, I have actually, and I think I've earned this now, I've actually taken the title also of Chief Prima Donna in our school. That way, no students can be a prima donna. And it's very, very true. I think we need to be honest about ourselves. We need to be authentic. And we cannot allow the system to take advantage of us. So how do we go about this? The context about internship is that it is important. Incidentally, there's very little interest in talking about it from a number of the stakeholders involved. And lastly, it's something that cannot be ignored. And my focus will really be on the ethics. It's about what's right and what's wrong. So how do we go about this? The underbelly. The underbelly is really about, there's been a lot of media attention in recent years about the ugliness of unpaid internships. It makes for really, really good headlines. And those publications have reported on these issues. And I gotta give a lot of credit to The Guardian, TheGuardian.com in particular, about having a very, very balanced approach on how internships affects us in the fashion industry. But these stories are national, these stories are global. And just because we're hearing these things out of the UK or out of the US does not mean it's not happening in Canada, it's not happening in Australia and wherever we might be. Oh, by the way, a shout out to all the Canadian students in here. Where are you? There you are? Okay, good stuff. Now, these companies reported primarily on stories about these four, but these should not be considered exclusives. I think those are the poster children of an issue that's been dragged through the media in the last 45 years. So, particularly W Magazine and The New Yorker, so those are Condé Nast-based publications. They've been taken to court by former interns that was suing them for unpaid wages, even though they signed up for an unpaid internship. All right? Now, incidentally, it kind of was dismissed by the judges, but it's under appeal, and we'll see where that goes. Harper's Bazaar, a very similar situation. And Alexander McQueen actually has been in news just this last week again, where now a former intern is suing them as well. This is for working overtime and unpaid wages. However, I don't think we should single out these companies exclusively. There is something going on that says we're going to make examples of some of these companies. And it's really meant to wake up the rest of us, because if I imagined you industry people in here right now, or as industry people right now, we probably each would look at ourselves and say, at some point in time, I participated in something unethical when it comes to internship. So my angle here is really, I don't want to talk about activism, I don't want to talk about labor, I don't want to talk about law, but I'm really interested in this intersection where we talk about the industry, and by the way, we are all the industry, whether we're educators, whether we're students, whether we're employers, whether we're journalists or media, we are the industry. And I'm interested in what do we do and who says what we should be doing and how we should be doing it. And so this big question mark in the middle is really what I define ethics. Now the next part is giving you a little bit of substance in terms of what internships are about. So this is a quick kind of genealogy of what goes on. So when we're talking about work, we're talking about regulated and unregulated types of work as defined by labor laws. So regulated, there are labor acts, there are laws and regulations either at the national level or the provincial level or at the local level. And unregulated is really the underground economy where it comes to work. And I've kind of put pedagogy and free market underneath unregulated, because the regulated part is taken care of. So we want to talk about unregulated and the pedagogy or the free market one. So pedagogy is, there are virtually every program in the creative industries and in fashion has some sort of requirement before students earn their degrees that they're spending time in the industry. You can call that work placement, you can call that co-op, you can call that internship. Whether they're paid or unpaid is actually not the issue right now. But the fact is that there's an accreditation from a university that says, in order for you to get this, you've done this. All right? Now, when you get paid, and most of you do, if not all of you, because the pedagogy of your program is that you're actually going out into the workforce for 9 months or for 2 summers, and you are making work that contributes to the benefit of a particular company, and hopefully that will lead to a job. There's the other issue about unpaid, and there are many programs that are saying actually you should not get paid because this is part of the education that you're receiving. And so that's a different dialogue that's actually happening in the industry. So we're going to focus on this, otherwise we would be here all day. So I'm not going to entertain any questions on the left side of the screen. We're only going to talk about the right side of the screen. Okay, so the purpose for internship, it's a gap bridger, if you will, for young people as they go into the workforce. And it's really a transition from when you're a student into the real world. It's something we call in pedagogy experiential learning, where you're kind of doing 2 things. Number one, you're going to figure out actually how the sector in the industry that you're interested in is working, but at the same time, trying to figure out what it is actually you are interested in. And from a recent study from the Graduate Market 2013, over half of the employers have indicated that they're currently not prepared hiring graduate students that have not had prior experience. So that's an important statistic to keep in mind. And I'm not going to bore you with any other numbers from now on. You can read them and look them up. We're going to focus on the ideas. Okay, I've talked 7 minutes, 9 minutes. And I think what we need to do is we need to define what an internship is. And there's many, many different definitions. I've kind of combed through some of the literature and thesauruses, and this is what I think it is. And I think we would generally agree that those are the components. So it's structured, it's supportive, it's an environment in which the intern is mentored by an employee for a fixed period under clearly defined objectives. That is what it really should be. And this is kind of where the law comes in. This is the version from the US Fair Labor Standards Act, but the Canadian laws are very similar, the Australian laws are very similar, the European laws are very similar, and their guidelines. But they kind of say there are these 6 things that are happening, and I'm going to very quickly go through that. So the internship, even though it includes actual operation of facilities of the employer, is similar to training, which would be given in an educational environment. So it assumes that the workplace is an extension of the university. Secondly, the internship's experience is for the benefit of the intern. Implicitly, it says it's not for the benefit of the employer. Thirdly, the intern does not displace regular employees, but works under close supervision of existing staff. So they're not displacing or doing the work that would normally be done by people that are being paid. The fourth, the employer provides the training, derives no immediate advantage from the activities of the intern, and on occasion, its operation may actually be impeded. Yes, it does take time and effort and energy to hire an intern. Fifth, the intern is not necessarily entitled to a job at the conclusion of the internship. I think that's the reality. And lastly, the employer and the intern understand that the intern is not entitled to wages for the first or for the time spent in the internship. Where the reality lies And what the problems are is in those 2 lines that are highlighted. It's very, very hazy, it's very, very vague, because it's not clear that the work that an intern does not benefit the company. And you can probably think of examples where you've read of postings that specifically say, we want an intern that handles our social media programs. Why? Because there's no one else in the organization that knows how to do social media, so they bring in young people, students, to handle these things. And the other one is that the employer provides the training derives no immediate advantage. Well, in the case of social media, there is an immediate advantage to that. Now, why is it important to talk about unpaid internships? The fact is, the literature, for those that are going the academic route, is I kind of scoured journals and Google Scholar, and the only thing that's being talked about is really medical residence programs and how tough that is. And to a lesser degree, business and marketing programs. But given the importance of fashion in the creative industries, we need to understand what we're talking about. So here kind of is the ethics piece. Ethics, I think we need to invite a dialogue of moral principles, and really that's what ethic means. It's behaviors that we exert on one another, and it's our beliefs, it's our values, and so we need to talk about these ones. And we need to have all the players around the table to talk about that. So it has to be between or among employers, higher education, students, government, media, advocates, and critics as well. I'm going to show you just a few resources that are out there, and there's many, many more. First one, Intern Magazine, and I think Alec Dudson is here. I think Alec has taken a very, very interesting approach with his publication, and that is he is not necessarily critiquing or advocating against internship. What he's actually doing is celebrating the work that interns are doing so that employers see, well, there's actually value to what my interns are doing. It's a very, very interesting and I think innovative way of looking at it. Like I said, The Guardian has tons and tons and tons of articles on internship. Interninc.com. This is US and also I think there's a UK version of that. RateMyPlacement.co.uk. You can actually go online and rate your employer about your internship. Intern Nation is a book that was published a couple of years ago by Ross Perlin. And then lastly, a national internship scheme, which was a very, very interesting document put out by Universities Australia. So now here's the issues part. This is kind of where I need your help. So what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be sort of running another slideshow, and there's 33 phrases that are coming up. And those phrases are intended for you to start thinking about some of the questions that you might have as a student working in the industry. And if you are fortunate enough to be in a position where you're going to be hiring students as interns, what would be some of the things that you would be thinking about in your role as an employer? And consequently, what kind of issues would you be thinking about is if you were a journalist, if you were in higher education, if you were in media, if you were a critic, or if you were an advocate. And I gotta do a little technical change here, so bear with me. You know, we always practice these things in our mind, and then when it gets down to it, I I did this at 2 o'clock in the morning. I had this brainstorm. It should be a slideshow, an automated slideshow. Play from the start. Here we go. And at this point, I haven't really shared with you what my own position is on unpaid internships. And these words that are coming up and these phrases are things that I learned from talking to other colleagues, talking to students, talking to employers, going through newspaper articles and books. And I'm gonna give you 7 seconds to throw out an idea or a question that you might have that answers or gives further insight into some of these phrases. So don't be shy. When you're ready, raise your hand. Here's one. Yes.
So the fairness one was the one that I picked up on.
The which?
The fairness word, I think you have to look towards the start, and it was just about the fact that what is fair, because students that go on internships put a lot of effort into it, often travel and go and stay somewhere else to do it that's not, local. And it's only fair that they should be at least compensated for doing that, to absorb some of the cost of living somewhere else for the first time, taking that really big step.
Right, it's about fairness. Any others?
In some perceptions, it's about here in the media, and because it tends to focus on the negative aspect, we don't hear about the good side of internships and what people actually get from them, particularly if it says it's for the benefit of the actually interning.
Right. Perhaps there's a shift to critiquing unpaid internships, and maybe not so much talking about the benefits of unpaid internships as well. I think that's a very, very good point. Yes?
I picked up on advocacy there. I just think that by doing the unpaid internships, we're kind of advocating our own exploitation. So until people start saying, no, you can't just not pay us, do you know what I mean? Then it will just go on forever, do you know what I mean? Companies will always want interns as long as we're willing to do them. So until we say no, we're not going to work for no money, then...
Yeah, advocacy and breaking that cycle. Yes?
The one that said support, I read recently an article about how Condé Nast are closing their internships because they were being sued by these previous interns. Do you not think that they kind of, because they maybe felt entitled and didn't want to do as much work as they should have done, that they spoiled it for other people who could have gone on to doing those internships and could have got their foot in the door as well?
Yeah, it's very true. One of the results of the lawsuits for Condé Nast was that for 2014 they've canceled all internships. Now we're not sure whether it's unpaid and paid, but I think that's actually a great disservice to the benefits of that and learning from those organizations. But I think that was a complete 360-degree turn because they didn't know how to go about it. So when that dialogue doesn't happen, it becomes very, very difficult for employers to make decisions on how to go about it.
One that stuck out for me was economic uncertainty. I would love to just go to London and do these internships. But how can I even survive when it's not paid?
Right. It's perhaps supply and demand, particularly as we're hopefully coming out of the economic recession. And how did companies cope during that time? You may have also, sort of heard people that saying, well, we can't afford to hire people because we don't have it in the budget, or there are departments that are working understaffed, so let's bring in an intern to fill in the gap. And when things get better, then we'll hire them perhaps.
I did it, you did it, about 18 months ago. We were fortunate enough in having a interview with Matthew Williamson actually in this building, and he talked about the nature of internships. He said when he was in that situation of having these opportunities, he said that he didn't actually mind that he wasn't being paid. It was, he talked very much about the experience, and again, that nature of somebody within the industry who's actually giving a positive response to it rather than negative.
The I did it, you did it, just to comment on that, or I did it, now you do it, is a little bit sort of the introduction into the industry. It's a ritual. And I know, I was a student at Ryerson. I did internships. And there was a period in my life as when I was working as a professional in the private sector where I said, you know what, I paid for nothing, you're gonna pay for nothing too. And you're gonna work harder, you know, and I'm gonna get my money's worth out of it. It's actually a form of hazing. Is that term familiar to the British? No. Hazing? Well, the news come out of the US. So hazing is really the initiation of young college students into either engineering or into sports. So they're made to do humiliating things. Like crawl naked on ice, and it does have severe consequences that end in death. So there's a lot of press about these things. So hazing is actually now outlawed, and I'm calling this a mild form of hazing. It's somehow acceptable to take advantage of the interns by not paying them.
I'm interested in the concept of law, because as we're in an increasingly globalised world, internships don't just happen in your own country, but often it's an opportunity for a student to go and actually do an internship. So a student from the UK might go to the States. Certainly in Australia, our interns are now going, that's an opportunity for our students to actually travel the world. And as we find that if labour laws start to actually be imposed, there's then visa issues, because if you're a student and you're going to go and do an internship somewhere and it's unpaid, you actually don't have to deal, you can actually do it on a tourist or a student visa, you don't necessarily have to have a working visa. So it then becomes complicated, and that's certainly happened with France now, where it's virtually impossible to get a proper internship in a French fashion house, because in a way they're protecting their own industry, and they're saying they don't want outsiders coming into this. So I know I don't know about it because you're part of the European Union, it might be different here, but certainly it's now become impossible for Australians to do internships in a French fashion house.
And it's the regulations and the barriers to knowledge transfer.
It can reduce access, but it could also protect your own industry in terms of the education institutes within your own country. But I think in a globalised world we're going to see more movement. You're going to be able to live anywhere in the world and work anywhere in the world in the future. So you want to open up opportunities.
Right. It's really labour mobility, especially in
you might need another
fashion.
visa category. I don't know.
Naturally.
And then more complications.
Yeah.
I matched onto the word lobbying, which I have sort of like a different perspective. My interest would be to find out what is the purpose of the internship to the person who's interning. If it's all about lobbying, does it have a value to it? After all, if those jobs that are going to be gained at the end of it are lobbied instead of earned through the work that the intern has put into it, what's the point in that for the intern?
Right. So it's really sort of the clarification of the expectations between the intern and the company. That's a very good point. We'll come up with some strategy there. Is there anyone that has a positive spin on internships? Because I think we want to explore that as well.
So I picked up on the same point as the lady over here, on what you said about economic uncertainty, that to me, the value of it is that the greater the uncertainty, the more the experience you've got to get. So there is something very positive because it gives you something that you can then take forward.
Right, right. It's really part of the 5-year plan that every student, whether they have formalized placements in the industry or whether they're gaining experience through informal placements, that's part of that, and they need to be aware of that. The thing is, and I'll give you an anecdote that really sort of put this in the forefront of my mind. Last summer, at the beginning or the middle of May, our graduates, they earn their degrees at the beginning of June. There were 2 students that came to me and said, we have this fantastic opportunity to intern for a major European fashion house. Major. Not going to name who it was. It doesn't matter because there's countless others that are in the situation. But what they're asking us to do is to have you sign a document that while we're interning there until the end of August, you need to say that we're still students. And I go, well, you know what, I can't do that. You're no longer a student as of the time you graduate, which was in June. I'm not going to sign anything like that. And they were very, very upset with me. You're not supporting me and all this stuff. And my point was, do you really want to work for a company? And I don't care whom. Who makes someone else lie on your behalf just because you think it's important? I think you should really be running the other way, right? And they actually did think for a moment to say, well, actually, you're right. You're right. And so I think there's this confusion and who has the power over the workforce in making certain decisions. And it boils down to the fact that I don't think we're educated enough. I don't think we have the knowledge necessarily back to sort of the 5-year plan on internship to say, well, actually, I do want to work for this company, and I am prepared to work for free, but those are the conditions that I will tolerate, or those are the conditions that I will be prepared to work under. Because I think the shame or the sadness about putting internship always in a negative light, even if they're unpaid, is the fact that there are large companies that we know can afford to pay. But you heard Todd say earlier, he's a team of 4, right? And I'm sure he brings in interns. But what an intern learns, even if they're unpaid, is invaluable because they're working with a craftsman. They're learning by doing, they're doing the hands-on thing, right? They're going to be able to take this information away from them, with them, and use it in their lives later on. Now, Todd obviously would get benefit because there's a student who will be cutting. There's a student that will be draping, pattern making, buying buttons. But at the same time, I think that is the intent. So if we bring back this notion of actually how labor evolved, and that is through apprenticeships. You bring somebody in, you teach them everything you know, and then you kind of pass on that craft to the next generation. I think that's an important consideration. Are there any other comments on these words? And of course, my screensaver now is on, so, but I think we rotated through them. So let me flip back to the rest of the presentation to wrap it up. Hello. Except this one. I think I'm gonna need help. Do we have a techie here? Here we go. Here we go. Just needs a little bit of time. And we're gonna. Okay, so wrapping it up. Now, in my abstract, it said I'd be talking about strategies and I'd be talking about best practices. Well, the fact is, when nobody talks about it and there has been no dialogue between all the stakeholders, there are no best practices, right? best practices are, this is what I'm doing, this is what you're doing, let's put our ideas together and let's come up with a set of approaches. But strategies, which is something that I would encourage we all participate in, is number one, is we gotta believe in the power of knowledge. And so that is giving information, useful information, accurate information, presenting both sides of the argument. Yes, there are good and not so good things about unpaid internship. What probably students should be doing is they should be asking. I mean, work is somewhat of a negotiation. You can work for nothing, you can work for little, or you can work for a lot of money. So I would simply say, students, be prepared when somebody offers an internship and demonstrate to the employer that you're actually providing value and saying, can I get paid as much? Keeping a diary. And that is really more a reference to yourself to say, how am I progressing in this particular internship? So that you can actually develop an action plan in how you want to go forward in a company. I think universities have an opportunity to vet internship postings. It used to be, and it still is in some cases, where an employer sends an email to a department and then just shoot it out via email to all the students in the school. But now I think there needs to be a vetting process that says, is this employer, even though we're not necessarily endorsing unpaid internships, are they actually providing value and understand what students should be getting out of that? We as industry, we need to think about or rethinking how we recruit. So not looking at internship as free labor, but actually investing in the future. I think we need to talk. And I think we're looking to you to change the paradigm. So just because we did unpaid internships doesn't mean that cycle needs to perpetuate. And I think we have a very important role to play in that dialogue. My little cartoon, and then we have some questions. Yes?
I think with paid internships, it's not just about being paid for the work that you're doing, because I think we're lucky to get the experience anyway. It should be paying to give more people an opportunity. If I was able to go to London and work for free, I would go for it straight away with no questions asked, but I'm not able to. I think unless you're living in that area or you've got family members that are willing to fund you, you simply haven't got that opportunity. So instead of paying you for the work that you're doing, because people would be grateful for the experience, they should pay you so that you have actually got the opportunity to go down there and just have the basics for living and getting down there. Because, I mean, for the students that live in London, that's great opportunities, but for people who don't have parents to fund them, I think it's not really fair in that sense.
Yeah. You're really drawing attention to the cost of education, which has gone up dramatically. So it's not just tuition, living costs, books and the like. But I know students in my program, they're working not just 10 hours a week, they're working 30 hours a week, right? To earn a living, to be students, and then they're students full time. There's also a notion here which is about, and I had the phrase up, which was fashion as a hobby. There is a stigma that is probably in the general population that, you're in fashion because you don't really have to work. It's just a fun thing. You've got wealthy parents, and you can work for free. And if you see images about, primarily in the fashion print industry, about students lining up around the block to get that coveted internship position, just like in the movie The Devil Wears Prada. I mean, I love the movie a lot because there are moments in it that are very, very well explained. And by cutting off that supply and saying no longer internships, or schools saying we're no longer going to support internships, means someone else will move in, right? it's almost like cutting off the heads of Hydra, because they will grow back. They will grow back. Yes?
If you personally ran a fashion house and offered out internships, would you give them paid or unpaid, and why?
Definitely paid. And I think paid can be in terms of nominal payments, sometimes in-kind payments. When I worked in the private sector, what I would do is I would actually support financially when students were doing the final collections. Because of working for us, we had fabric, we had sample fabric, we would give them lining, we would give them interfacing, all those kinds of things. And I think those were really valuable. But we always paid them cash as well.
Going back to the lobbying thing, I watched a program where you had parents exchanging their student kids for different posts, like a lawyer having their son go over to a friend's firm, and that friend have their son go over to their fashion house for internships and things. How do you suggest we deal with such things? Because obviously the other interns who are not that well connected are pretty much interning for something that won't pay off, or that would be a waste of time for them, in a way.
I think you're talking about nepotism, where it's more about whom you know, not what you know necessarily. And that's a reality of the workplace. It's not isolated to fashion, but it's a reality that you have to deal with. And so, the other way of looking at this, it's networking. Your role in being a professional in fashion is you need to talk to people very early on. And you need to rely on developing a story, developing a personal brand, so that when an employer hires you, they know that you're authentic, that you have a unique perspective that you can bring to that particular organization. Yes?
How you were saying that pay should possibly be regulated when offering internships, do you not think that's something to regulate what the student is actually doing whilst they're there would be more useful? I've had multiple different internships where I've been paid or unpaid, and sometimes I've just been left sat in a corner filing or cleaning out stock cupboards, and that was wasting of time for me. And if they was actually teaching me and making me do it, even though I wasn't getting paid, I might find that more valuable.
Right. That's an excellent point. I think both the employer and the intern has a responsibility in talking about the expectations. What is it I'm going to learn? What is it I'm going to contribute? And how do we kind of solidify this relationship? I think it sometimes has to do with a little bit of insecurities from students to really make a demand of the employer. And to look at the employers critically. We tend to be drawn into the fact that we want to work for big brands, big magazines, and we will do whatever it takes to get in there. And then we think once we're in there, we're going to figure it out, we're going to solve the problem. But I think you need to almost have a contract. And so that would be, as a number one, educating students in telling them these are the criteria, or these are the qualities of a good internship. Is this somebody that you can talk to regularly, right? Are you given projects? Are you being led into the inner circle? Are you able to observe and just hang around? Are all the doors open for you? And for the employer to say, well, actually, there is somebody in my department or in this particular office that will spend 2 hours each day with an intern and will develop a learning plan while they're here for the 3 months. And it's very, very simple. I mean, this is how we write employment contracts for CEOs. It's exactly the same thing. It's talking about it. And this is why this is critical that we start this dialogue now. and not just between one or two stakeholders, but by everybody involved, as I said, media, employers, higher education. And I'll end it with that one. I'm administrator, and this is the dilemma that I find myself in. Advocating against unpaid internships puts me in a funny situation, because I am technically what stands between a student and an employer looking for an intern. So I gotta be somewhat diplomatic in terms of not alienating partners that have worked with the school for decades and saying, you know what, we're gonna get rid of our internship program, we're gonna do something differently. And they're gonna say, what do you mean you're gonna do something differently? We need to rethink it. And I think when we give the tools to the students, and we also need to give the tools to the employers so that they know how to do a better job. Invariably, and that's my last thought, is I don't think employers want to break the law. They invariably are breaking the law because there's a little bit of confusion, there's not a lot of clarity, and in some cases it's ignorance, but very often they may not even know that it's happening. All right, so do your part in improving internship and getting the most out of it. Thank you very much.